Let me ask you something that has been gnawing at my brain for the last 48 hours straight. Is the Indiana Fever front office deliberately trying to torpedo their own franchise from the inside out? Because I have been sitting here in this studio, scrolling through footage, reading through transcripts, analyzing every single frame of what went down in Indianapolis, and I genuinely cannot wrap my head around the level of organizational dysfunction we are witnessing in real time. This is not a minor disagreement. This is not a small coaching hiccup. This is a full-scale institutional meltdown being disguised as business as usual, and the people responsible for fixing it are actively making it worse by hiding behind their own players. What is happening right now in Indiana is nothing short of a masterclass in how to destroy a championship-caliber roster from within, and every basketball fan on the planet deserves to know the ugly truth. Welcome back to Simply Explained, the one and only destination on the entire internet where you get the raw, uncut, completely unvarnished reality of everything happening across the basketball landscape. Today, we need to have a very serious conversation about a story that has evolved far beyond a simple sideline spat. We are talking about Caitlin Clark, head coach Stephanie White, the Indiana Fever organization, and the deeply troubling decision to deploy Lexi Hull as a public relations shield to clean up a mess that the coaching staff and front office created entirely on their own. Let us rewind and set the stage properly, because the context of what happened matters enormously. During the Fever's recent matchup against the Portland Fire, a game that ultimately turned into an embarrassing lopsided defeat, Caitlin Clark came out of the gate absolutely scorching. She was responsible for every single point the Fever put on the board in the opening stretch. The energy was building. The crowd was engaged. The offense had rhythm and flow. Clark was doing exactly what a franchise cornerstone is supposed to do, establishing dominance early and setting the tone for the rest of the contest. And then it all came crashing down in the most bewildering fashion imaginable. Head coach Stephanie White pulled Clark from the floor barely 3.5 minutes into the first quarter. What followed was not a calm, measured coaching conversation on the bench. It was a visible, heated confrontation caught on camera for the entire world to witness. The body language was unmistakable. The tension was palpable. Clark was visibly frustrated, and White appeared to be asserting authority in a moment that called for patience and strategic thinking rather than ego-driven power plays. Rookie Raven Johnson was inserted into the lineup in Clark's place, and the results were predictable. The Fever's offense collapsed. Portland seized the momentum and never relinquished it. The game spiraled completely out of control, and what should have been a competitive contest turned into a humiliating defeat that left fans furious and the organization scrambling for damage control. The internet erupted immediately. Social media was flooded with clips, commentary, and outrage from a fan base that has been growing increasingly impatient with the coaching decisions surrounding their generational talent. The backlash against Stephanie White was swift, passionate, and entirely warranted. Fans demanded answers. They demanded accountability. They demanded to know why their star player was being treated like a liability rather than the franchise engine she so clearly is. Now here is where the story takes a turn from frustrating to genuinely infuriating. Instead of Stephanie White stepping to the podium to defend her own decision-making, instead of the general manager or any member of the front office addressing the firestorm publicly, the Indiana Fever organization made a choice that reveals everything you need to know about how they operate behind closed doors. They sent Lexi Hull to face the media. Lexi Hull, one of the most likable players on the roster and widely recognized as one of Caitlin Clark's closest friends on the team, was positioned in front of reporters and asked to explain a situation she had absolutely no obligation to clean up. The reporter did not ease into the topic gently. They went straight at it, noting that social media was ablaze with discussions about the Clark and White altercation and asking Lexi directly what really happened. This was the crossroads moment. This was the fork in the road where Hull could have offered genuine transparency or followed a carefully constructed script. Unfortunately, what came next sounded far more like the latter than the former. Hull immediately moved to minimize the entire episode. She characterized it as routine frustration, the kind of thing that supposedly happens every single day in professional women's basketball. She pointed to foul trouble as the primary catalyst, suggesting that the opposing defense was targeting Clark with physical play, that some questionable calls went against her, and that the early substitution was simply a standard coaching adjustment to manage the foul situation. According to Hull, The exchange on the bench was an in-the-moment reaction that carried absolutely no residual tension. She claimed it was not being discussed in the locker room and that everyone had already moved past it. With all the respect and admiration in the world for Lexi Hull as a competitor and a teammate, that explanation does not hold up under even the slightest scrutiny. Not even a little bit. The notion that removing your franchise player from the floor while she is single-handedly keeping your offense alive during the opening minutes is just a routine foul management decision is simply not credible. Every coach in every league at every level understands that you do not pull your best player that early in a game over minor foul concerns unless something deeper is driving that decision. You trust your superstars' intelligence and composure. You let them navigate the physicality. You coach around the situation rather than removing the situation from the floor entirely. But the single most troubling element of Hull's entire media session was the moment she attempted to redirect the blame toward the media itself and the intense spotlight surrounding Clark. She essentially argued that because cameras follow Caitlin Clark constantly, every minor interaction gets amplified beyond its actual significance. The implication was clear. The fans and the press are overreacting because they are paying too much attention. That is textbook deflection. That is an attempt to make the people who noticed a legitimate problem feel guilty for noticing it. The fan base is not manufacturing outrage out of thin air. They are responding to what they watched with their own eyes on a live broadcast. They saw a coach confront a player in a manner that was visibly aggressive. They saw a star benched during a hot stretch. They saw a game fall apart as a direct consequence of that decision. Telling those fans that they are simply seeing things because the camera happens to be pointed at Clark is dismissive, condescending, and ultimately counterproductive. The supporters of this team are not foolish. They understand basketball at a high level. Many of them have followed the sport for decades. They can distinguish between a standard rotation adjustment and a coach making a statement at the expense of the team's competitive interests. And when they see a player like Hull being wheeled out to smooth things over while the actual decision-makers remain conveniently silent, it only confirms their worst suspicions about what is happening inside the organization. The reaction from the online community has been overwhelmingly skeptical of Hull's characterization. Supporters have flooded comment sections and forums with pointed criticisms not of Hull herself, but of the organizational strategy that put her in that position. One particularly sharp observation that circulated widely questioned why the coaching staff and front office consistently avoid direct media accountability, instead relying on players to absorb the heat generated by coaching failures. It is a devastatingly valid point. When a head coach makes a decision that fundamentally alters the trajectory of a game and ignites a national controversy, that head coach owes the public an explanation. The general manager owes the fan base reassurance. The organization owes its supporters transparency. Pushing a player to the microphone to serve as a buffer between the decision-makers and the consequences of their decisions is not just cowardly. It is a betrayal of the trust that players place in their organization to have their backs rather than using them as shields. Others have pointed out the absurdity of Hull's attempt to frame the Fever's mediocre record as somehow acceptable because several losses came within a narrow margin. The argument that a handful of games were decided by fewer than 5 points is supposed to provide comfort, but it does the exact opposite. It highlights the fact that this team, with the talent it possesses, is consistently failing to close out winnable games. That is not a badge of honor. That is an indictment of preparation, late game execution, and coaching adjustments. Telling a passionate, invested fan base that they should take solace in almost winning is tone-deaf in the extreme, especially when those fans are watching a roster loaded with enough firepower to be a legitimate contender. Zooming out from this single incident reveals a pattern that should alarm everyone invested in the future of this franchise. The tension between Stephanie White's coaching philosophy and Caitlin Clark's playing style is not a new development. It has been simmering beneath the surface for an extended period, occasionally boiling over in moments exactly like the one we witnessed against Portland. The fundamental issue is one of compatibility. Clark is a dynamic, instinctive, boundary-pushing offensive force who thrives when given freedom to create, improvise, and push the pace. White's system appears to prioritize rigid structure, controlled tempo, and a hierarchical approach to authority that clashes directly with the kind of empowerment a generational talent requires. This is not an abstract philosophical debate. It has real, tangible consequences on the floor every single game. The offense looks disjointed. The The rotations seem unpredictable and at times punitive. The overall energy of the team fluctuates wildly depending on whether Clark is being unleashed or restrained on any given night. And the record reflects that inconsistency perfectly. A team sitting at the .500 mark with this level of talent is not a team that is building towards something great. It is a team that is actively underperforming due to internal friction that the organization refuses to address publicly. The broader landscape of the league makes this situation even more indefensible. The entire economic explosion that the modern era of women's basketball is experiencing can be traced in significant part to the cultural impact and commercial magnetism of Caitlin Clark. The sold-out arenas across the country, the massive television deals, the unprecedented media coverage, the charter flights, the skyrocketing merchandise sales, all of it is fueled in large measure by the attention and excitement that Clark generates. The Indiana Fever are not simply managing a basketball roster. They are stewards of a cultural phenomenon, and they are handling that responsibility with breathtaking incompetence. You would never see a premier franchise in any major professional sports league treat its cornerstone attraction this way. You would never witness a coaching staff bench a transcendent superstar in the opening minutes of a game over trivial foul concerns and then hide from the media while a teammate is sent out to explain away the chaos. It simply would not be tolerated. The coach would face the cameras. The front office would issue a statement. Accountability would be demanded and delivered. The fact that none of that has happened in Indiana tells you everything about the organizational culture currently in place. The path forward is not complicated, but it requires courage that this front office has yet to demonstrate. Either the coaching staff needs to fundamentally adjust its approach to accommodate and elevate its most important player, or the coaching staff needs to be replaced by individuals who understand how to build a system around a generational talent rather than trying to squeeze that talent into a predetermined box. There is no middle ground here. The status quo is untenable. Sending friendly, likable teammates to the podium to paper over systemic dysfunction is not a sustainable strategy. It burns through goodwill, it erodes trust with the fan base, and most importantly, it puts players like Hull in an impossible position where they are forced to choose between honesty and organizational loyalty on a public stage. That is an unfair burden to place on anyone, and it speaks volumes about the character of the people making that decision from behind the curtain. Caitlin Clark deserves an organization that matches her ambition, her talent, and her commitment to excellence. She deserves a coaching staff that views her as the centerpiece of a championship vision rather than a problem to be managed. She deserves a front office that stands in front of the microphones during difficult moments rather than ducking behind the players it is supposed to protect and empower. I want to be absolutely clear about something before I sign off today. None of this criticism is directed at Lexi Hull as a person or as a player. She is a tremendous competitor, a valuable member of that roster, and clearly a loyal friend. But loyalty should never be exploited by an organization to avoid accountability. What the Indiana Fever did by positioning Hull as the public face of their crisis response was manipulative, transparent, and ultimately self-defeating because the fan base saw through it immediately. The reality is staring everyone in the face, and no amount of carefully worded press conferences from teammates is going to obscure it. The Indiana Fever have a fundamental leadership problem. The coaching philosophy is at war with the franchise players' strengths. The front office is more interested in controlling the narrative than fixing the product. And the players are being caught in the crossfire of an institutional failure that starts at the very top. Something has to give. Either this organization commits to building everything around its once-in-a-generation talent, or it risks losing her entirely, and along with her, the golden era of relevance that she has single-handedly delivered to their doorstep. The clock is not just ticking, it is thundering, and the basketball world is watching every single second of it unfold. Stay locked in. Trust what your own eyes are telling you. Share this with every basketball fan in your circle, and make sure you subscribe so you never miss a single breakdown. The truth does not hide, and neither do we. I will catch you on the next one. Peace. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Are you buying Lexi Hull's explanation that it was just routine foul trouble?